Family reunions were always a minefield. Every year, the same house, the same huge table, the same fake smiles and restrained hugs. I went, as always, because my mother begged me. He said it was just lunch, as if years of tension could be erased by a plate of lasagna. But I went. I sat in the same corner as always, quiet, observing, trying to fit into a space that was never truly mine. My older brother, Daniel, was the center of attention, always had been. Graduated, successful, with 3 children everyone adored. He had a way of looking at me as if I were a factory error. He'd never said it quite like that. Until that day. The conversation started off light, talking about jobs and accomplishments. When my mother asked what I was doing, I quietly told him I was working on a volunteer project. He laughed out loud. Volunteer project? Oh, sure. Because doing nothing useful is your specialty. The sentence fell like a slap across the room. Someone dropped their cutlery. My aunt cleared her throat. My father looked away. I stood still. The food on my plate seemed to disappear. You've been nothing but trouble since you were a child. You've never brought any pride to this family. He said it with a smile, as if it were funny, as if it were true. Share this story to reach further, subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'll be very happy to read each comment. I looked around, and no one said anything. No one defended me, and that hurt more than his words. The silence validated everything. I felt small, useless, the way he always wanted me to feel. But inside, something burned. Because in that moment, I understood. This was the last time I would be diminished in that house. The last time I would lower my head to fit in. And that's when I made a decision. To remain silent would be to be complicit. So I stood up, my hands trembling, but my heart firm. I took a deep breath and simply said, "Give me an hour. After that, you decide if I'm useless." And I left the room. Everyone stared at me, uncomprehending, but I already knew what I had to do. I climbed the stairs with a sinking feeling in my stomach. I went to the guest room where I'd left my backpack. Inside was my laptop, and inside it, everything no one in that house knew about me. My work, my videos, the lives my project had already touched. Because while they were staring at diplomas on the wall, I was out there, living with purpose, even without recognition. I opened the files I'd prepared days earlier, on my own. It was a presentation I'd never thought I'd show there. A mental health campaign I'd developed with a local NGO. A simple project, but one that had already helped hundreds of young people in crisis. There were testimonials, videos, real numbers, people who said they were only alive because of that content. I went downstairs again, this time with my laptop in hand. The table was silent. Everyone ate at a mechanical pace. Daniel barely glanced at me. My mother whispered, "Son, never mind." But I didn't. I placed the laptop at the head of the living room and connected it to the TV. "I want to show you something. It's quick. Just listen to me." No one answered, but no one stood up. So I pressed play. The images began. Testimonies from young people in tears, offering thanks. Excerpts from lectures, workshops in public schools, statistics on suicide prevention. My face appeared, but it wasn't about me. It was about the impact, about what I did when no one was looking, about the part of me that never fit into family dinners, but that made sense in the real world. And when the video ended, the silence continued. Only now, it was a different silence. It was respect. Daniel stood still, unresponsive. My mother wept silently. My father had his head down, and that's when I looked at everyone and said, "This is what you call useless. And if you still think so, at least now you know who I am." And then, a clap, 2, and suddenly the whole room was applauding. The applause caught me off guard, not because I didn't think the video deserved it, but because I knew they weren't just applauding what they saw. They were trying to erase what they'd done before, the silence that had burned me for years, the look of contempt that had been disguised as concern. And now, that sound, that applause, hurt almost as much as the insult, because it was late and superficial. I didn't want applause. I wanted presence. Daniel remained silent, sitting, hands in his lap, jaw clenched. For the first time, he didn't know what to say, but the discomfort was visible, not of regret, but of losing control, the narrative, the authority. He had always fed on the image of being the example, the successful one, and now he had seen what he never wanted to see. I existed outside his shadow, and I shone, and that bothered him more than any failure. My mother came closer. She hugged me. She whispered in my ear. I didn't know, and I believed her. Because she was never evil. She was just blind. Blinded by pride, by fear, by tradition. She wanted so much for her children to be accepted by the world that she forgot to ask who we really were. And now, she cried. Not just for me, but for everything she'd lost by not seeing me sooner. People started talking. Aunts saying they were proud. Cousins saying they had no idea. Comments that sounded like rehearsals. But I kept quiet, because now I understood. It wasn't about them. It never was. What I did, what I built, didn't need their recognition to exist. I no longer needed to prove anything. And it was this awareness that truly freed me. I looked at my brother again, still motionless, and deep inside, I knew. If he said anything, it would be to try to regain his place of superiority. But he didn't, because there, in that room, in that moment, I was the bigger man, not out of pride, out of truth, and truth doesn't scream, it just remains. After everyone returned to the table and the commotion subsided, I went out onto the porch. I needed air, silence that wouldn't hurt. It was dark now, and the neighborhood lights flickered in the distance. I stared up at the sky, thinking about everything I'd carried quietly for years. The swallowed attempts, the discredited ideas, the ridiculed dreams, everything resurfacing. But now, with a different weight, a different value, I heard footsteps behind me. It was him, Daniel. He stood a few steps away. He stared at the ground, hands in his pockets. I waited. I said nothing. I just left the space open. I wanted to see if he could break that pride, if he'd have the courage to break his pose. The silence lasted a minute, 2, 3, and nothing. He stared straight ahead as if searching for a phrase that didn't exist, until he finally said, I didn't know you did all that. That was it. No excuse, no eye contact, just a statement. And there, in that moment, I understood. He couldn't do it. He didn't have the emotional tools to deal with someone like me, someone who didn't need to defeat anyone to be valuable, someone who built without humiliating, who grew without stepping on anyone. I replied calmly, yes, you never asked, and it hit him. I saw it on his face, a new wrinkle maybe, a tremor in his breath, but he stood there, and so did I. We didn't fight, we didn't argue, because there was something deeper there, the silence of someone who knows they've wasted too much time being blind. And I no longer needed anything, not regret, not forgiveness, just emotional distance. I went back inside and left him there, because that was the difference between us. He always needed an audience. I just needed a purpose. And now, with everything out in the open, his emptiness was no longer my responsibility. I wasn't useless. I was whole. And that, no one could take away from me. That night, lying in bed at my parents' house, I was silent. But it wasn't the same old silence, the one that suffocates. It was a different kind. The silence of someone who had finally been heard, even if late, even if with reservations. For the first time, I wasn't just tolerated in that family. I was recognized, and that changed something in me, as if my voice, which had always been there, had finally echoed. I remembered so many times when I wanted to show something, a project, a text, an idea, and I always heard the same thing. This has no future, or, when are you going to get a real job? And I believed them, because when everyone tells you you're invisible, there comes a time when you shrink inside. But now, with a simple presentation, I became the center of attention, not out of vanity, but out of relevance. The next morning, my mother called me to talk. She said she couldn't sleep. I felt ashamed, son, of not knowing, of never having asked. I listened calmly. I didn't want perfect answers. I just wanted to be heard. And she, for the first time, offered that. You've always been different, and I thought I needed to fix you. Now I see that I was the one who needed to change. Those words touched me more than all the applause the night before. She asked me to explain the project more calmly. I grabbed my laptop, sat down with her, and opened the folders. I showed her the graphs, the reports, the behind-the-scenes details. She listened attentively, as if trying to make up for lost time. And I saw the effort in her eyes, the effort of a mother who made a mistake, but didn't want to keep making it. And that, for me, was what mattered. Not the remorse, but the sincere attempt to do things differently. After coffee, she hugged me, tightly, like never before. She said she wanted to help. Can I go to one of the workshops with you? I laughed, excited. You can. Of course you can. And that's when I realized, sometimes, the greatest act of love isn't saying, forgive me. It's saying, let me learn from you. And in that moment, I did. Because forgiving also means allowing the other person to evolve. The following week, something unbelievable happened. My brother called me. Daniel. He never called me. My mother was always the means of communication between us. I answered, thinking it would be something practical or brief. But he took a deep breath and said, there's an event at the company. We need to talk on social impact. Would you be willing to speak there? I remained silent, not out of doubt, but out of surprise. Daniel, the same one who'd called me useless, was now inviting me to speak at his work, a place where he was a role model, where he'd always introduced me as my brother, who's still finding his feet. And now, he wanted to show me to his world in a new way. Something in him had changed, or, at the very least, recognized, and that was powerful. Even if he didn't know how to express it, I accepted, not to prove anything, but because I understood the magnitude of the opportunity. Standing on that stage wouldn't just be my victory. It would be a narrative break, a warning to everyone who's ever been invisible in a family, a company, a school. You don't need to change to be loved. Others just need to learn to see. And I would stand there as someone who knows exactly what I'm worth. On the day of the talk, Daniel was nervous, more so than I was. There are big people here, CEOs, directors. I just smiled. Relax. I'll just tell you what I do. When I took the microphone, I looked to the back of the room and saw my brother sitting there, his eyes fixed. For the first time, he was the one listening in silence. And I spoke firmly, with presence, as if I knew the space itself. Finally, the applause came again. But this time, it didn't hurt, because it came with context, with respect, with true recognition. Daniel came up to me, shook my hand and said, "You were brilliant." And even if he didn't say sorry that day, those 3 words were the beginning. A beginning that, this time, I was ready to accept. After the talk at Daniel's company, the response was greater than I imagined. I was tagged in posts, sent screenshots of stories, and messages arrived from people who had never said good morning to me at school. I was no longer the brother who does some business there. Now they called me by name. For the first time, the truth about who I was circulated unfiltered, undistorted. I was seen clearly. That same week, I was invited to speak at a university. A professor in the audience nominated me. He said my talk was the kind of thing that needed to be taught where theory doesn't reach. I accepted, of course. But more than the invitation, what touched me was seeing my brother repost my video with the caption, "Proud to have this in the family," the same family that labeled me a failure. And so, from an insult to visibility, everything turned around. But don't think it was magical. There was still resistance. People who said, "Oh, now everyone applauds," as if recognition would erase years of invisibility. But I wouldn't let that consume me, because now I knew my worth. I knew the price of every step, every fall, every time I heard no from my own home. No one could erase that. I began to realize that my story wasn't just mine. So many people wrote to me, sharing similar experiences. Siblings who belittled, parents who ignored, families who pushed me to the bottom. And each message gave me strength, because sharing my journey wasn't just about me anymore. It was about everyone who was still silent, waiting for the courage to get up from the table too. And the more I spoke, the clearer it became. I was never useless. I was just a nuisance to a structure that didn't understand sensitivity, listening, and truth. Now, with the microphone in hand and the experience in my chest, I made a point of remembering, pain doesn't define us, but it can shape our voice. And mine was just beginning to reach where it needed to. A few days later, I received an unexpected invitation. Daniel wanted to have dinner with me, just the 2 of us. We'd never done that before. Curious, I accepted. We met at a low-key restaurant. He arrived tense, but there was something different in his gaze. Less arrogance, more vulnerability. We sat down, ordered our food, and he took a deep breath before starting. "I've been an idiot to you my whole life." The phrase hit home. Not because it was new, but because of the courage to hear it from his own mouth. He continued. He said he'd always felt overwhelmed, that he'd had to be the example from a young age, and that's why he'd become competitive with me without realizing it. Belittling you was the only way to keep my place. I listened silently, not to judge him, but because I knew each word carried immense emotional weight. After a few minutes, He cried. For real. He said he was ashamed of what he'd said in the meeting, that calling me useless was more about him than me, and that seeing everyone applauding afterward was like a punch. There I saw that I'd wasted too much time trying to erase what I didn't understand. And that broke me, because as much as I'd moved on, there was still a part of me that wanted to hear that. Just once, I held his hand. He said he didn't need to justify anything anymore, that the pain was real, but that forgiveness was possible. And more than that we could still build something new, without defined roles, without competition, just like two brothers trying to learn to be better from each other. And in that moment, there, at some restaurant table, it was like starting over. We left with a hug, a strong one, shameless, without vanity, a hug between two men who once hated each other in silence and now chose each other, honestly. And I slept lightly that night, because knowing someone recognizes you after denying you for so long doesn't erase everything, but transforms. And sometimes transforming is stronger than winning. After that dinner with Daniel, things really began to change, not just between us, but in the family atmosphere as a whole. At the next gathering, my mother asked me to open the evening with a speech. I hesitated, but she insisted, "People need to know who you are." So I prepared something simple, a short presentation with excerpts from the project and recent stories I'd received from impacted young people. This time, no one shifted uncomfortably in their seats. No one looked away. Even my aunt and uncle, previously skeptical, were paying attention. When I showed a video of a girl sharing how she escaped an abusive situation after attending the workshops, tears welled up, not just in her eyes in the recording, but in the eyes of my mother, my cousins, and my grandmother. The silence this time was reverence. Daniel was beside me, and it was he who started the applause. Sincere, unhurried. One by one, everyone joined in. But now I understood. It wasn't out of vanity. It was for impact. They were finally feeling the weight of what I was building, not as a side job, but as a mission, as a purpose. And I realized that when truth finds space, it transforms even the hardest hearts. After the performance, my grandmother took me aside. She said, "I judged you for years, son. I always thought you were just lost, but you were finding a path none of us understood." She kissed me on the forehead, and that was worth more than 1,000 words, because her generation never apologized easily. But when they soften, we feel it. And in that moment, with the whole family gathered, looking at me differently, I understood. Sometimes, what seems like rejection is just ignorance. And when you have the courage to show your essence, without shouting, but without hiding, the world, little by little, learns to listen. And there, in that small room, full of memories and hurt, I saw a new cycle begin. A few days after the family performance, I received an Instagram direct message. It was from a boy named Evan. He was 17. He said he was about to give up on life when by chance, he stumbled upon one of my videos. "I saw you telling your story, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't alone." I read the entire message, trembling, because now, more than ever, I saw meaning in what I was doing. Evan was in a temporary shelter. He was being rejected by his own family, much like me. He said he'd watched every lecture he could find on the channel and was now organizing a small discussion group among his fellow shelter members. "I want to try to do here what you do there," I cried, because that was bigger than any room, bigger than any recognition. It was an echo. It was a seed. I showed the message to my mother. She read it silently and then hugged me tightly. "That boy could have been you, years ago." I just nodded, and somehow she understood. So she suggested we go there, meet him. Yes, she wanted to go with me, not just to support me, but to see up close what she'd previously ignored. It was her wanting to understand another piece of the son she'd almost lost. We scheduled the visit. When Evan saw me, he cried. He couldn't believe it was really me. We talked for hours. He introduced me to the group he'd formed. Simple people, with attentive eyes. They asked me questions, shared their pains and dreams. And my mother, she sat in the corner the whole time, listening to everything. She cried more than once. At the end, she stood up, looked at the group and said, "I'm the mother of the guy who saved you." And she laughed, and everyone applauded. On the way home, she said, "Thank you for not giving up on you. Because if you had, we would have lost something we never even knew existed." And I silently thanked her for finally no longer having to hide who I was. Not from myself, not from anyone. After my mother's visit to the shelter, something inside me shifted. It was as if an old wound had finally healed. For the first time, I felt like I no longer needed to explain or defend myself. My existence, my work, my choices, everything made sense now. Not because of the applause or recognition, but because finally, I was seen, unfiltered, unlabeled, just as I was. This feeling began to permeate everything. In meetings, I spoke more firmly. In lectures, my voice trembled less. Even my body changed, more upright, more present. It was as if I'd returned to myself after years of trying to fit into others' molds. External validation helps, of course, but the real turning point was when I stopped waiting for permission to exist. One day, at one of those community events, a 15-year-old girl asked me, "How did you manage not to hate yourself?" The question pierced me, because the truth is, for a long time, I did hate myself, not for who I was, but for thinking I would never be enough. And only when I understood that the problem wasn't me, but in the eyes that couldn't see me, did everything change. And that's what I told her. This conversation had a profound impact on me, because it reminded me of how much we walk around hurt, trying to be loved by those who don't know how to love. And when we finally accept our own light, the world no longer has the power to extinguish us. And I accepted it. Not just my story, but everything it carries, including the pain, including the brother who hurt me, including the family who took a long time to understand. And as contradictory as it may seem, today I am grateful for every silence, every mocking laugh, every closed door, because it was in this soil that my roots grew. And today, where there was once shame, there is purpose. And where before I sought acceptance, today I only need to be true. A few months later, I was invited to receive a tribute in the city, a simple but symbolic ceremony. They called me a young changemaker. When I read that on the invitation, I was moved, because the same city that had seen me silenced for years was now calling me an example. It took me back in time, remembering the nights I cried in my room, thinking I couldn't take it anymore. On the day of the ceremony, my mother went with me, and to my surprise, Daniel did too. He arrived quietly, but with a sincere smile. "Today is your day," he said, and for the first time, I believed him. I walked onto the stage with trembling hands, but a calm heart, because I knew I wasn't there by chance. That journey that began with public humiliation now ended with collective recognition. In my speech, I didn't use a script. I spoke from the heart. I spoke of the pain of being called useless, of the strength that comes when no one believes in you, and of the responsibility that comes when you understand the impact you have. I said that anyone who has ever been disbelieved can be an agent of transformation, and that sometimes all we need is someone to say, "I see you." When I finished, the audience gave a standing ovation. But what struck me most was seeing my brother standing, his eyes wet. My mother held his hand, and in that gesture, there was more than support. There was reparation. Not the kind I asked for, but the kind they chose to give. And that set me free once and for all, because now everything I was, and everything I carried, was at peace. In the car on the way home, Daniel said to me, "You're the inspiration I never had. And today, my son admires you more than he admires me." I didn't respond. I just smiled, because sometimes the greatest answer is to remain exactly who you are, without lowering yourself, without changing to please. Just keep going, and keep going with truth. Shortly after the tribute, my mother decided to organize another family gathering, but this time with a different purpose, to celebrate everyone's achievements, not just Daniel's, not just the most successful, everyone. She wanted to make room for each story, big and small. When I received the invitation, I confess I hesitated. That house still held harsh memories, but I accepted, because now I wasn't going back as a child. I entered the room with different eyes. That room, once so hostile, seemed smaller, not because it had changed, but because I had grown. Everyone greeted me respectfully. They called me by name, not as Daniel's brother, nor as the one who does some social work, but as someone they knew, someone they recognized. And that was all. Throughout the night, each person had their moment. When it was my turn, I calmly stood up. I took the microphone my mother held and thanked her. But instead of talking about myself, I decided to speak about the importance of listening. How many times has someone in this room sat quietly in a corner, never being asked how they were? How many of us have carried pain while pretending to be fine? I looked around. Some lowered their eyes, others nodded. I recounted how that cycle was broken when someone decided to listen, when the other person stopped being the family outsider and became a valuable human being. And I ended with a sentence I'd written days earlier. We don't need applause. We need presence. And when that presence is real, even silence becomes a hug. The room was quiet, but now the silence was light. It was healing. My mother came to me and said, "You changed the history of this family." And I, with tears in my eyes, replied, "Only because one day she almost destroyed me." And there, in that embrace, in that room, everything fell into place. I haven't forgotten what I experienced, but I transformed it, and transforming is always the most beautiful ending life can write. Today, when I look in the mirror, I see someone whole, with scars, yes, but unafraid of them, because each mark tells a chapter of the journey that brought me here. I'm not perfect, nor do I want to be, but I am real, and being real, in a world that thrives on appearances, is almost an act of courage. Courage that for a long time I thought I didn't have, but now, I know it's always been within me. My brother and I didn't become best friends, but we became something much more valuable. Two adults who respect each other, listen to each other, and know when to compromise. He still has his internal struggles, so do I. But now we fight side by side, not against each other. And that's already a huge victory, because forgiveness, when born from truth, doesn't erase the past. It opens space for a future that doesn't repeat the same mistake. My mother has become my partner. She goes to events with me, organizes campaigns with me, and has become almost an ambassador for the project. She says that by supporting me, she's supporting herself too. That before she didn't know how to love without control, and now she learns every day. It's beautiful to see someone blossom after 60, to see that it's never too late to deconstruct yourself, to change the tone of your own voice. And I carry on, with the same project, the same values, but with a new weight on my shoulders, the responsibility to inspire. Because now I know how much a word can save, how much a gesture can heal. And it all started with pain, with a cruel word, with a brother who called me useless in front of everyone. And today, even he recognizes he couldn't have been more wrong. If this story touched your heart, share it. Send it to someone who needs a reminder of their worth. Subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and comment here where you're listening from. I read everything with care. And remember this, you don't need to fit in where you're diminished. You just need to exist where you're seen. And when that happens, even the impossible changes shape.